Welcome back to the Old Man Guitar Life channel, where we explore learning the guitar at a later stage in life. Today, I was going through some of my old guitar magazines that I'd collected during the first attempt that I had to play guitar, and I came across the old Guitar for the Practicing Musician magazine. Those were basically the YouTube for, well, one of the YouTubes for the 1980s. This one in particular was 1988. I know it's fun to go back in time and see exactly what was happening in the 80s, especially with regards to guitar. So I thought today we would take a look at one of the magazines. First, though, I wanted to take a look at just exactly what was happening in 1988 because it helps to put things in context. So 1988, Reagan was president, and he was just wrapping up his presidency actually at the end of the year. We had an election back when elections were normal. It was Bush v. Dukakis, in which Bush just destroyed Dukakis. So we were heading into the first Bush era. 1988, really the 80s, from at least that part of the 80s, from my perspective, were bad. It was bad with regards to a lot of stuff. If you look at the movies, Beetlejuice, The Land Before Time, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, I don't even, maybe this is a bad graphic too, but none of those really excite me. With regards to major events, the first Walmart Supercenter, so we were moving into the era of Walmart. Take that for what you will. Prozac was sold for the first time as an antidepressant, which is no coincidence when we look at the music that was out in 1988. I think it all ties together. I thought it was interesting the prices of a few things. If we look at them versus what they would be in today's time, and filming this November of 2024. So minimum wage, $3.35 an hour. If you run that through the magical inflation calculator, that comes to $8.93 an hour for today, which really, McDonald's is paying over 10, 15 bucks an hour. So kids today, if you're starting out, minimum wage is working out a little better for you. With regards to a gallon of gas, this is what we all, at least in America, we always rate everything by a gallon of gas. A gallon of gas was $1.07 back then. And I remember, it was over $1. Ooh, the end of the world is coming. Gas is over $1. Can you believe it? Well, if you run that through the inflation calculator, that would be $2.85 today. I just filled up yesterday for $2.99, so that is actually, as much as we might want to complain about it, that's tracked pretty well. Wages. So the annual wages back in '88 was $24,450. If you run that through the calculator, we get $65,165. So figure out where you are on the spectrum with regards to back in 1988. One of the interesting things to look at is the actual Billboard chart. And I picked November 12th, depending on when you're viewing this. And I just looked at the first couple of songs on there. But if we want to realize just how bad the 80s, the end of the 80s were, classic rock, from my perspective, was on its last breath, if not dead. Now, grunge was going to come around and try to resurrect that for a little bit. But for the most part, classic rock was Wild Wild West, number one on the Billboard charts. Kokomo from the Beach Boys, yeah, it's all right. The Locomotion from Kylie Minogue. Bad Medicine, if you're a Bon Jovi fan. I wasn't, but Bad Medicine. And actually, The Desire from U2, that old EAD song. That one I did like a lot, actually. So let's go ahead and jump into the actual magazine. Vinnie Moore. Now, I don't know if Vinnie Moore ever made the status of a metal god, but I have to say that whoever dressed Vinnie with those white boots, they match the Ibanez, but the boots, I don't think a metal god really should be wearing those boots, Vinnie. So if we go ahead and take a look at the table of contents, this, I think, was probably peak Guitar for the Practicing Musician, if not this issue, but this era. The three songs that they're tabbing out, Layla, Living on a Prayer, and Here I Go Again, really, really strong songs. Oftentimes when you see magazines that had tabs, they would have one good song and then a couple off the wall. Maybe they appealed to some people, not so much mainstream. So this was really killer. And really, that was the reason why I've always bought the magazine. I would look for one song. And actually, I was so bad, I'd never learned to play a song, but I could pick out a little riff and try to work on a little riff that would sound like that song, right? So it would satisfy me at the time. And so that was what I was doing back then. Actually, why I bought the magazine. What I'm going to do, I'm not going to go through the tabs, but I'm going to go through just to look at some of the historical things, from my perspective, anyways, from 1988 from the guitar world. So one of the things that cracked me up was the "You Figure It Out" ad, and really most of these are going to be ads, right? You figure it out, which for, if they weren't going to tab something out, and the people who were good players, of course, were figuring it out. But it was a 2-speed recorder, so it had full speed and half speed, which for me never would have worked out anyways. But they don't give the price here, so God knows exactly what they were trying to get for that. So KMD, I had never heard of KMD amps. But if you look at the people who were endorsing it, some big names, some big names on that list. And, KMD obviously offered them some dough and they endorsed it. But KMD, a blast from the past that I don't recall at all. One of my favorite things, and this was the YouTube from the 1980s, was the Hot Licks video. I'm going to put a link in the description of the video to one of my favorite Hot Licks videos from, if it's still around on the YouTubes, from Steve Lukather. If you look up Hot Licks videos in YouTube, you're probably going to get some clips, and they're just, at least number one, the price on these, I think they're like 45 bucks. They're $50 per video, which is $133 going through the inflation calculator. So that was a chunk of dough back then, compared to what you can get for an internet lesson today from, look at TrueFire. You've got some of the best artists out there. Not endorsed by TrueFire. But the amusing thing to me, like I was such a terrible, not even a player, I was just so terrible. When I look at one of those today, like the Lukather one, Steve was probably one of the most talented player at the time, if not the most talented, top 5. And he's just like rattling through stuff at 10,000 BPM. And, well, this is here. What you want to do is just go through the amorific scale and then run down to the little, scale. And it's like, who in the name of God is good enough to like watch what he's doing and actually get something from it? Maybe the upper 10% were able to do that, but it's just so beyond me. But it's a lot of fun to look at today. One of the interesting things, too, was that Joe Satriani, I don't know if Joe still does magazines. I guess he wouldn't even have to now with it's so easy to get video out there. But I remember Guitar Secrets was one of the things that I always looked at. And it never really made a whole lot of sense to me. Joe was way beyond where I was. But it was a lot of fun to look at. And as I mentioned earlier, one of the biggest things that, as far as the ads go, was basically catalogs or buying videos or tab books. I thought it was interesting, the Boston one here, if you want to buy a tab book for Boston, for the Boston record, third stage. So essentially what you had to do, like if you had a gig down at the 31 Flavors Baskin Robbins that coming up weekend, you weren't going to get the tab book in time, right? You had to send them a check and get it back, get the actual book back. Who knows? 4 to 6 weeks was always the shipping time. So if you were in a hurry, you were out of luck. You were going to have to hopefully you figure it out so you could figure it out on your own. Another interesting thing to me was the Yamaha pedals. Now, I didn't know Yamaha was selling effects pedals. And I don't know when they sold them other than late 80s or, when they stopped or whatever became of them. But there were a couple of pedals here that were for sale from Yamaha. And then lastly, the charts. This was always one of my favorite things to look at. And one of the reasons why, so if you look at the amps, and if you look at number 7 on the amps list, the Crate G20, That was my amp. That was the amp I had, and it was just the worst amp, if not the worst. It was one of the worst, and it was number 7 because it was cheap. It was inexpensive and it was cheap. And but I always loved like going through the magazine and looking through it and looking for the Crate G20. Like, yeah, I've got one of the most popular amps, and just awful. But so one of the things I find interesting today is the Fender American Strat was number 1, and that probably wasn't the cheapest Strat. I'm sure it wasn't in 1988. And then we see a lot of big hair guitars, I guess, with the Kramer, the Charvel, the Kramer, BC Rich is on there, of course. Charvel actually has a number of them. Gibson, the custom Les Paul number 9, so Gibson wasn't showing too high on the list. They only had a couple on the list. Another thing that speaks directly to 1988 and just how utterly horrific it was, if we look at the effects pedals. Metal, chorus, metal, chorus, metal, distortion, distortion, a couple delays. I think we can really see where rock music was at the time. A lot of chorus, a lot of metal type pedals, distortion, and all of that. Wasn't really my thing. Maybe it's your thing. If so, I'm not poking fun at you, but I just found the late 80s music-wise just to be, for the most part, really, really bad. So lastly, wanted to look at some of the music that did come out that I didn't think was really, really bad. Some of the songs that I remember, for the most part, that in an era that wasn't real good. So we had REM was putting out some good stuff. Pink Floyd, Rick Astley, Rick Astley, of course. Neil Young and the Blue Notes. I just love that stuff. I remember that still when it came out. Van Halen was still at the top of their game, maybe. OU812, maybe not the top of their game. Van Halen was bringing it strong. Guns N' Roses, probably the biggest 1988 as far as classic rock would go. The Traveling Wilburys had a release. One funny thing about the Traveling Wilburys that I learned was how they came up with the name was, you know how if you're recording something and maybe you make a mistake and someone would say, we'll bury it in the mix. Well, that's where they got the Wilburys. We'll bury it in the mix. So I thought that was amusing. What else? Oh, U2, Rattle and Hum. I actually liked that. I know it's in vogue not to like U2 today. I know it's in vogue probably not to like Rattle and Hum, but I did like that. I actually liked that. It was a double album back when you were getting albums. The Church, Under the Milky Way, I just love that song. I love that song. I played it all the time. That was kind of where I was in life, and just I don't know if I've ever heard another Church song, but I did love Under the Milky Way. I still like it today. And then Tracy Chapman, Fast Car. That was another song. I remember that's one of those summer songs. I was driving around in my Honda Accord with the windows down, listening to Tracy Chapman, Fast Car, up really, really loud, and good times. So that's pretty much it in a nutshell. 1988 guitar for the practicing musician, going back to the Wayback Machine today. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. I'd love to hear your thoughts on 1988 if you were around, and I'll catch you in the next video.